Welcome to Bible Mysteries. You're listening to episode 106, Storm on the Horizon, interview with Sylvia McKelvey. What if there are secrets in the Bible the world doesn't want you to know? Are you ready to take the red pill? Now here are your hosts, Scott and John.
Hello and welcome once again to Bible Mysteries Podcast, the show that talks about the things in the Bible the world doesn't want you to know. I'm Scott Mitchell here with
John Potts.
And we are honored today to introduce to you author Sylvia McKelvey. Sylvia is the author of Storm on the Horizon. This is a fascinating book. I've got to tell you, it's one of the best I've read on just great factual evidence about UFOs. The subtitle is The New Age, UFOs, and the Cosmic Christ. Sylvia, welcome to Bible Mysteries.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Well, we are so glad and blessed that you could join us today. I got to tell you, your book was one of those that I couldn't put down. And, you know, for a non-fiction type book or for sometimes nonfiction books can be kind of like whatever. But every bit of evidence you provided here was just so fascinating. I couldn't put it down. And then you draw some wonderful conclusions at the end. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? I understand you're out in California, but give us some of your background, if you would.
Well, yes, definitely out here in sunny California. It's very warm today, but, better that than rain, yes. Yes, I have been a researcher for about 30 years now. And as a Christian, I was raised in a very Christian-oriented family. My father was a Bible study, I guess you call them superintendents of Sunday school now, I think, also. So we were in Sunday school every Sunday, and so that started at a very young age for me. So I think that was also something that helped spur on my interest in researching these New Age groups and things that not necessarily were a heavy end occult, and certainly not when I first started was the UFOs, but it definitely was a stepping stone to researching other things that ultimately led to me writing this book.
Wow. So really, one of my questions I was going to ask you was, how you came to be an investigator for MUFON. But before you answer that, I obviously had another question. Did you come to faith in Christ before or after your work? Well, obviously, based on what you just shared with me, then you had a faith in Christ before you ever began researching UFOs.
Absolutely.
Okay. Fascinating. What an amazing background to start with, where so many others that don't have such a faith experience could begin investigating the so-called paranormal and could be led to some really strange conclusions. But let's back up to that first question. How did you come to be an investigator for MUFON?
Well, it wasn't something I set out to do, actually. As I said, I had been doing some research on New Age movement, and at that time it started in 1982 with a report in a newspaper. Actually, it was in newspapers all around the world that the Christ was back and he was among us once again. Mm. And for those of you that might have been around during that time and remember that this was a big media push with radio, television, newspapers announcing this new Christ, who they were calling Maitreya, being back here on earth once again with us. So as a Christian, naturally, that's going to get my attention. And I started looking into that and finding out that there were so many people connected in New Age movement that had the same belief structure, where they were looking for another savior, I guess you would call them, rather than the one that we have, and that's in Jesus. But that was just a beginning for me. And as I started to see how these groups were forming and how many things they had in common, even though they were coming at it from different beliefs and attitudes, they had still started working towards something that was going to happen on this planet that we all had to be prepared for. And eventually that also hooked into the UFO end of it. Now, again, I wasn't that impressed with it. I think most of us, we thought UFOs were kind of so-so, maybe yes, maybe no. But it wasn't until 1985, 1986, where it became more mainstream media. This was the report on the JAL UFO report from the Japanese pilot, JAL Airlines, who actually made an FAA report, and it was published in the newspaper. And I thought, well, there's probably a lot more to this than we actually realize. And that's when I began to look further into people that were having experiences. It said they had a sighting of a UFO. And I thought the best way to do that would be go to the organization that was already heading up the research, and that was MUFON. So I ended up joining at that time. And I think people need to understand also that with MUFON, especially when I joined it, it was very scientific prone. We had people from the SETI Institute and these type of genre that was part of our local group here. But it is something that where you do have to study. They put you through a course. You have to pass the course of understanding before you can even be issued a card saying you're a MUFON investigator. So, I think that does lend a lot of credence to people who are out there for MUFON taking these reports, because it is taken very seriously and very scientifically as well.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, you mentioned Maitreya, the false messiah. That was, I didn't realize it was a big thing back in that year, a decade. You were talking about the 80s. I had, was in college at that time and probably not paying much attention to any of this material. But as I understand it, Maitreya, now, is that the term that's given for the Buddhist so-called messiah, or is that a New Age name?
No, it's one of the names that are given to the Buddha Messiah or the Imam Mahdi for the Muslims. He goes by various different names, but why they settled on that, I think, is because of their association with the Theosophical Society. And a lot of their information and belief structure comes out of Buddhism. So that would just be a natural stepping stone for them to promote the Maitreya Buddha as being back.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's very much involved in it, and I was surprised to see how it even transformed to him being back on Earth, to him now having a spaceship that is orbiting our planet. So they haven't shied away from the UFO involvement at all.
Was there some event that triggered all of this, or did someone just come up with it and they started promoting the idea? I mean, how did this come about?
For the Maitreya, my understanding is that it kicked off at a certain date based on the what they were calling the New Age beginning, that cycle. We were leaving the Piscean Age and going into the Aquarian Age. So when that happened with however they measured out with their astronomy, I believe, is when they decided to say, this is the time now we're going to go forward with announcing this being here on our Earth.
Wow. Well, it's fascinating that you and even other authors I've been reading recently are drawing a similar conclusion, or connection, I should say, between UFO type activity, abductions, and the appearances and frequency occurring, and that connection between the rise in occult and spiritism. And you mentioned the Theosophical Society. Would you mind kind of just briefly, for our listeners who may not know what that is and the history of Madame Blavatsky and all the rest, can you give just a very short synopsis of that for us?
Well, yeah, it was an occult belief structure that was made popular from Madame Blavatsky, Russian. I guess she immigrated here at one point, but it was based again on these belief structures of this Maitreya and this returning Christ. It came to our country in the early 1800s, and from there it took off through the Theosophical Society, and in particular through Alice A. Bailey, who was a member and promoter. Yeah. She was one also that was approached by, quote, their ascended masters to actually write out the whole synopsis of what's going to happen on our new age. And that took the form of 24 books that were published through her own publishing company, which was a Lucis Trust, still in existence today. Mm-hmm. But at that time, in the 20s, it was referred to as Lucifer Trust. Right. So obviously, yeah, they had to change the name, I guess, for better press. But she wrote 24 books under the influence of a spirit master that was telling her about getting ready for this new Christ coming forward and what people had to do. What was interesting also, going back way to the 1920s and taking dictation from the spirit master, is that they said they would involve themselves in 3 specific areas, and that would be politics, religion, and education. And I think if we look at what we're viewing today, I think they have done their work well in that regard, and in ways that they concentrated their efforts in getting this new type of social behavior and thinking that's become pretty commonplace.
Wow. Absolutely, yeah.
So correct me if I'm wrong on 2 points about her. One, this is pretty scary too. Wasn't she a school teacher?
She was actually the wife of a minister. And
wow.
yeah,
Okay.
that's pretty frightening too. It was probably not the best of a grouping, but I can see where there was probably some resentment after getting out of and away from him and the church, that this to her was a natural next step, because she wanted something different. And of course, there's also always these beings waiting for that opportunity as well.
Yeah.
And she was approached also by a spirit master that told her she had an important work to do, and that this work would involve her eventually writing these books. So sad to say, she left the confines of being raised in a Christian home, marrying a minister, to now becoming one of the key people who are actually working against the crusade for Christ.
Yeah. You know, I've heard that's also true in a similar way of Aleister Crowley, who was the son, I believe, of a Christian minister who went on to become the rebellious, the most evil man in the world. He billed himself at one point and did much to promote Satanism.
Yeah, unfortunately, you can see that with a lot of the people that do end up getting into the occult or the supernatural end of it is. And this is something I think as Christians and ministers especially should be aware of, that oftentimes they are not getting their needs met in a church, or they've had a bad experience in a particular church. And it could be because they've had this association somehow with the occult. So if the churches aren't prepared to listen to these people, to help them, to guide them, and to, number one, to take them seriously, we'll lose them. They will go on to the occult side that will be more than accommodating to believe them and encourage them in that walk.
That's exactly right. There's a huge movement among young people, especially, that they go to church with their parents or whatever, their friends, and they just don't feel like they're getting answers to the questions that they're looking for.
Yeah.
Because a lot of churches are just not talking about it for whatever reason. They don't want to scare people off or whatever. But young people go in there looking for answers. They either get treated like they're crazy or whatever, or they just don't give them the answers. So then they go to the New Age movement, who's ready to give them all kinds of answers. Now, unfortunately, not the right answers, right?
Right.
So,
and I've seen that happen actually, and it's very, very sad. And you bring up a very good point that our churches are really not talking about the supernatural, which is actually what our whole Christianity is based on. When you look at our Savior and everything he did here, and the type of Savior that he is. It's all based in many ways on the supernatural. But I think that is probably what I see happening more and more, is that there is a shying away from having even sermons based on that. You know, when's the last time you heard about Peter being released from prison? You know, it's like they skirt around things that have a supernatural connotation to them. And I think that could possibly be one of the signs that we're in now, as far as maybe not having the good meat and potatoes that we should have of our Christianity. And I know that a lot of people are going to church and they're feeling like they're just not being fed. That I've been to several churches recently, and a lot of them seem to they've gone from doing the preaching into Bible study. And there's people that are sitting there hurting from week to week, or they have needs that need to be met. And, you know, just going through the book of Matthew maybe is not going to help them. So, you know, I have to applaud you, number one, for being a minister who's brave enough, I should say, to step out there and to take on this subject and to be able to deal with people, and the saved and the unsaved, because that's exactly what Jesus would do.
That's very kind praise, and I thank you for that. And I'll tell you, I still, to this day, you know, I get sent books, so and usually they're from people I know, but your book just showed up one day, and I don't know how I got it, other than to say the Lord directed me to it, because normally I would go purchase these books, but this one, it sat in a stack for a while because I had quite a few before it. And when I finally got to this, I went, oh my goodness, I didn't know this was about this. And the timing couldn't have been more perfect. So the Lord's timing, as always. And then once I started it, I couldn't put it down. And so we're going to get to the reason for the title and everything here shortly. But I got to tell you, Sylvia, you really hit something on the head about this topic not being wanting to be discussed in churches today. Because even we were discussing earlier that we know there's a certain age demographic that probably can't even grapple or grasp the spiritual significance of these things. They hear aliens and UFO abductions and they think, oh, those are wacky people, some strange, guy out in the field that nobody believes. But they don't realize how real and tangible these things are and how it ties into the dark spiritual realm that the Bible talks about. Do you think that's part of the deception, is the church is dismissing it because the devil does not want us to just explore what he's doing?
Oh, absolutely. It's much nicer just to talk about the other things and have more of a social club than an actual, educational Bible teaching situation. Yeah. And naturally, the devil doesn't want the publicity. So let's move on to something else in topics. So it makes sense to me. And we are told that there is going to be a falling away from the faith, and this could be beginning stages of that. It is just everything that's been coming out recently that has to do either with the occult. Certainly, we've all seen the ghost hunting shows on TV. Has become more mainstream now, and it's like a hobby, which to me is just really kind of interesting that they will. Well, it's interesting also if you were to talk to these people, just kind of getting off the subject here, but the ones that are doing the ghost hunting, let's say. They don't take seriously what they feel that they're encountering, as if they have some ultimate control over it. Yeah. The reason I don't think that they have encountered something terribly, demonic in that respect is that, Satan doesn't want bad press. So he's not going to do something really nasty, but he's certainly capable of doing it. But at the same time, I've heard these people often sit down and say, oh, you should never, ever, ever use a Ouija board. That's very, very true. But at the same time, they're walking around doing their investigations with electronic Ouija boards. They are getting that communication.
Trying to stir the pot of the spiritual realm, not something I think is a good idea. So really, you draw the conclusion in Storm on the Horizon that there really is a very striking connection between the occult activity and a sudden uptick or resurgence or increase in so-called UFO activity, right? You see there's a connection between those two.
I definitely do. And what kind of surprised me when I was getting into it, also in trying to do the backstories of these people who have had experiences and have sightings, and they're well known. And for the most part, I've let them speak for themselves. I wanted it just to be in their own words, what they felt they encountered. But a lot of them, whether it was before or after or during, had some association with occult experiences, visitations, ghosts, hauntings, these types of things, which didn't come out necessarily when they're talking about the UFO topic. So I have a section in the book where I kind of give backstories on that I thought was very interesting. But also the fact that so many of them always seemed to equate it with something that was going to be good for mankind. It was never anything negative about it. Right. There are some stories and some reports in that, and I've had a few where there has been some very bad encounters and very frightening things have happened to people. Right. But for the most part, when they're promoting a lot of the UFO topic and speakers, it's always about something that we're all getting prepared for. And I think the one group that has done the most to prepare humanity to that type of thinking is a group, we see them on TV all the time, the Ancient Aliens.
Oh, yeah.
They have done more to promote the arrival and the expectance of our space brothers, our creators coming back to Earth and trying to equate everything that they find archaeologically speaking as being part and parcel of them being here, the gods that were here before. And boldly say, well, they were here before and they're coming back. So,
Right. Mm-hmm.
there's, after a while, that is going to sink into society to where everybody's going to start thinking the same thing.
I agree. I think it's going to be the dominant paradigm that's going to eventually replace things like evolution and Big Bang Theory, because ultimately they're saying the exact opposite on these Ancient Alien shows. And John and Sylvia, I think you've seen them. They're saying that religious encounters of angels were actually encountering UFOs or aliens, whereas to me, it's the opposite. It is the angels, the fallen ones, that are going to come back and claim to be the ancient ancestor aliens that seeded us. Mm-hmm. And that panspermia theology or philosophy or whatever they want to call it, I think is going to be the science of that time. It'll be part of that deception.
Right, I absolutely agree with that. The fact that they put them in the creator category takes away any kind of a threat, estimate from them in that regard. Although, their view and the government view sometimes do not necessarily mesh in that regard. But again, if you look at what they're actually presenting to the public when they go to these ancient burial grounds or ancient cities, it's interesting to me that they pretty much take everything that's there and make it fit their narrative. Yeah. Whereas if you look into it deeply and actually study the ruins and the culture and what happened there, of these amazing societies, they're gone. What happened to them? They're in ruins. Mm-hmm. And if you study their culture, they'll find out a lot of the cultures. In fact, every one that they've mentioned so far that I've researched, and I mentioned that in my book, every one of those cultures all had human sacrifice as a form of their culture to appease these gods. So if these were the gods that came before, and they advocated, you must have human sacrifice to us. I mean, I mentioned too, do you really want them to come back?
Yeah, exactly. I'm not sure I do.
The blood sacrifice.
Oh yeah, passing children in the fire to Moloch. I mean, that's right around the corner if it's not already present in the abortion industry. Yeah. Speaking of children, Sylvia, of course, in all of your evidences that you provide in the book, the encounters are not just adults; they're children too. And I don't recall if you specifically addressed this encounter in the book, and I'm thinking that you did, but you're familiar with the children in Zimbabwe in the early 90s, was it, that they all saw this thing? And I've seen where they've gone back and actually re-interviewed those children again as adults, and they all seem to recall this vision of the whatever was being placed into their brains telepathically by these aliens that they saw was about, taking care of the planet. It sounds very much like the climate change agenda. Did you sense the same thing, that they're trying to give this take care of Mother Earth ideology as now infiltrating in the political spectrum today?
That has been a long time thing that has been noted with the Space Brothers. And I did not reference these Zimbabwe children, but I am familiar with that mm-hmm. story. And it is often something that you'll also hear within the New Age cultures that, our planet's dying, we have to save the Earth. And okay, I'm all for taking care of the planet or whatever, but it goes beyond conservation to an actual spirituality where it's becoming a religion. Oh, yeah. And I think that is, again, the psychology involved in it is that these beings are concerned for us. We're going to ruin our planet. We're going to blow it up because of our atomic weapons. And so they're going to be seen as some kind of helpers, if not saviors. Yeah. But the idea that, this is all going on and it's all bad has to be planted first. So I think a lot of that has caught on, whether you've been through the UFO cycle to hear it from them, or if you've now gotten on the wagon to what everything now is conservation and the green plan and all of this.
Yeah, I agree. So you talk a good bit in the book about these orbs. And what do you believe the glowing orbs are? Are they drone scouts from other alien craft? Are they probes, or are they some other type of information gathering entities? What has been your experience?
Yeah, well, the orbs is that's a very, very fascinating subject in itself. In fact, I have one chapter devoted to that because you can talk of orbs as a condensed energy.
Mhm.
People have equated them with spirit. They have equated them with manifestations of beings. So if you look at all of the different variances that happens with these orbs, it's fascinating. And the fact that, to me, number one, my view might be a little bit different than most people on it. Just from my research and my exposure to them, is that they are not, I do not believe that they are actual ships like a saucer. I believe that they're actually a living thing. And what has made me think that is that oftentimes people have described their behavior, and their behavior to me is almost like you would have a trained police dog. For lack of a better explanation, it seems like they do have some specific things that they have to do, whether it's patrolling the planet, if they're scouts, if they're keeping watches on things, but they're different from people who have actually encountered an actual UFO craft. So they're very interesting that way. But in my personal opinion, I think there's some kind of a life form.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fascinating. In the book, you actually took your own pictures of your own encounters or sightings, if you would, of orbs. I think from the airplane and as well as maybe even in your home. Do you feel like these entities are, Satan's attempt to hinder you in your work? Were they malevolent towards you in any way? What was your own experience?
Yeah, that's very interesting because these experiences happen at different years, kind of far apart from each other. The sighting that my husband and I had were of these orbs. There were 12 of them, and right here in California. And I was actually coming back at the time. I was working with MUFON, had just done an interview with someone who had a sighting of their own when we had this sighting. And that was another thing that got me thinking, that the whole time I'm watching these 12 objects that were actually coming very close to us, and one even hovered overhead, is that this doesn't make sense. They don't act, and I can't see anything that I would write down in my MUFON book that described a craft of any sort. They were like very well linked together, as if they were just in perfect harmony with one another. I did see one, and I just wish my husband had been paying attention enough to see it, who was whipping around in front of us and actually did some kind of transformation where it just kind of puffed with a couple of bursts, almost like you see a popcorn kernel pop. And from that was this glowing amber center to it. And then that faded away, and whatever this object was is what came towards us. But the whole time I'm looking up at it where it stopped overhead, is that could not see the outline of a craft, just the swirling plasma type material. And I remember distinctly that there were waves coming off of it, the type of waves you see on a street when it's really hot, or on the hood of your car. And so I know it was generating a whole lot of energy, but it couldn't feel any heat coming off of it. So that was interesting to me. But the way that these orbs acted and what they did, and their size, I estimated them to be about 30 feet in diameter. They were large.
Okay.
Did not fit the scenario of what you would think about a craft in the way that they acted. To me, it was something that just seemed to be very curious. And then they went on their way.
Did you ever feel threatened by them?
No, not threatened at all by them. And I was praying the whole time I was looking at this thing.
I would imagine I would have been too.
How long did this go on for?
This was actually, it lasted 2 or 3 minutes. It was a pretty long sighting as far as, what people see. It was enough for us to, quote, have an experience there where we could observe whatever these things were. In fact, my husband, I stayed in the car. That's where I had my little tiny camera taking a picture and hoping I would get something. But he was outside the car and actually saw when this object, whatever it was, came up and stopped overhead of our car. Took off. He said that he saw it had like a tail, like almost an amoeba with a tail to it. So here again, you're not talking about a contemporary craft of some sort.
Exactly. It didn't
Plus,
sound like technology. It was some kind of a sentient being, is
yeah,
what you're describing.
there's something to that effect, but I did not feel threatened. We had our dogs with them. Our dogs weren't upset. There wasn't anything that changed for us as far as our time or anything. It was just pretty nondescript after that. But what was maybe the most astounding thing is that after we had stopped, had lunch, an hour later, we're back on the road going through the valley. And we come up on the hillside, and I'd look up and we see them again. And this time we were able to observe that two had broken off. And this was now an airplane approach area for the airport in San Jose, California. And there was a commercial airliner coming in, and we saw two orbs to the tail section of the airplane. And they were bouncing up and down as if they were just surfing the jet stream. It was, to me, that just was something I thought, well, is this play or what is going on here?
It almost makes you think of dolphins in a wake of a ship.
Right. The dolphins love to ride the waves. So to me, again, here I'm going, why is this happening? This doesn't fit, again, the traditional sighting that you would see, but it's been reported many times that they do often follow airplanes. They were certainly at an area that wouldn't cause harm to the plane, and obviously couldn't be seen by the pilot or passengers, but they were there.
Yeah. This may seem like an odd question, Sylvia, but do you think if these entities are spiritual in nature, and it really sounds like they are, do you think that they could be positive, angelic type entities as well as satanic entities, or do you think that would be a disguise? Looking playful, looking non-threatening might just be a disguise.
Yeah, I've thought that one through a few times over, and I go back to thinking about the fall itself. When Satan took a third of the angels with him, were they all the same type of angels? Were they all archangels? Were they cherubim mixed in there too? So we have to acknowledge the fact that there are different types of angels.
Yeah.
So if this is some kind of sentient being, then it would make sense that there would be, just the same as angels, that there would be God's angels and the devil's angels.
Yeah.
So it's possible that these could be in service to God in some respect, but also then they have the counterparts that are not so accommodating.
Exactly.
And if you look back at the history of these orbs, have been sighted for centuries.
Right.
There's also an account in the 1500s in Germany where there was a group of these objects in the sky that actually were fighting each other. They were having a battle, a huge battle, and this was documented twice. So that has me thinking, well, obviously there's some kind of disagreement there if these objects are in some kind of bitter conflict with each other. So in that respect, I think that's a possibility.
Absolutely. Well, we know in the Bible there's the evidence in the book of Daniel when I think it was Gabriel that came down to speak to Daniel. He said the prince of Persia withstood him, and he was going to have to go back to fight with the prince of Grecia. So it could very well be that type of scenario. Yeah,
it was such a bitter situation that Michael had to come and help him.
Yeah. Yeah, so they're armies, right? I mean, that's what they're called. God is the Lord of hosts, and host is army. John, that sort of brings me to what I like to call the $1 million question for you, Sylvia, and that is just strictly from your opinion and your research. What is your take on the supposed different species of extraterrestrial beings, such as greys, insectolins, reptilians, whatever? Do you think they are actual extraterrestrial sentient beings from other planets, or are they some form of a demonic or satanic deception?
Yeah, that's a good question. There are different species being recorded, from the Nordics down to the reptilians, praying mantis types, the greys. And I have kind of a different opinion on that than a lot of researchers I've known. To me, I believe there is a variety of them. Do I believe they are sentient beings from another planet? No. Mm-hmm. I do believe that they are demonic because of the history of their interaction with humans. It's usually not a good situation. But what I also thought about and I point this out in my book too, that there's another possibility in what I refer to as rogue elements. And these are beings that are out there doing kind of their own thing. And I'm thinking maybe they have some hostilities. They obviously are not in favor of us humans. So there are some that have shown some outright hostilities towards even children. And so I'm thinking, well, is it possible? And I'll get you guys thinking on this. Is it possible that maybe even because God had a rebellion on his hands, that maybe Satan does also? So we'd be seeing some groups out there doing their own thing, and maybe they're trying to create their own beings in opposition to what Satan's doing. You just don't know, but it certainly raises some interesting questions.
To hear the rest of our fascinating interview with Sylvia McKelvey, please subscribe to Bible Mysteries Premium Podcast at BibleMysteries.supercast.com.
Thank you for listening today. If you like what you heard, share it with a friend. If you want to learn more, you can go to Unlock the Bible Now. That's utbnow.com.